White text on a black background reads Anthologies by Disabled Editors, presented by the Paul K. Longmore Institute on Disability, along with the Disability Visibility Project. The San Francisco State University emblem on a white background with black text reading Paul K. Longmore Institute on Disability. White text on a black background reads Disability Visibility Project, creating, sharing, and amplifying disabled media and culture at Disvisibility.
Hey everyone, my name is Alice Wong. I'm the editor of Disability, Divisibility, First Person Stories from the 21st Century, which is published by Vintage Books. And it was released June 30th of this year. And I just want to give a quick thank you to Emily and her entire team and the Longmore Institute for organizing this event with me. And just to describe myself, I am an Asian American woman. I'm wearing an aqua blue vest with an aqua blue turtleneck. I have a mask over my nose that is attached to a ventilator. And behind me is a very dark background. And Kelly, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you for having me this afternoon. My name is Kelly Jensen. I am the editor of Bodytalk, 37 Voices Explore Our Radical Anatomy. It was published by Algonquin Young Readers August 18th, so a little bit over a month ago. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with Alice. Physical description of myself: I am a white woman in my mid-30s with black hair, red lipstick, wearing a green oversized top with white stripes.
Mm-hmm. And Kelly, I would have to say that, it's really funny that both of us have the anthologies out this year, and that's very strangely, we both have 37 contributors, which is an odd number, but yet, wow, like, both of us have this number of contributors. And the fact that we're both disabled editors, and I think, this is exactly why I thought it would be great to have a conversation about, not just about anthologies, but about the work of being an editor. So before we dig into that, I'd like to ask, how is the book launch going for Bodytalk? And can you tell people a little bit more about what this anthology is about?
Absolutely. So my anthology is 37 different voices writing about the physical and political aspects of having a body. So disability is a huge theme throughout the book, visible disabilities, invisible disabilities. But the book also talks about aspects of the experience of having a body that leans a little bit more political and not necessarily about ability or disability. That certainly plays into it, but it's a very wide look at what it means to have and operate a human body. It's published for teens. It's a young adult book, but it's one that I think is perfectly appropriate for older readers and more mature younger readers. So I see no problems with 10, 11, 12-year-olds reading it. Many of them will be more than ready for the content. In terms of how release season has gone, it's certainly been a different release season. Instead of doing bookstore in-person events, going to conferences, meeting with librarians and teachers and educators, it's been very focused on online connection, which has been great, just different. It's been a very different type of release and equally satisfying, I think. And that got me thinking about the sudden growth of virtual events. And it was something I wanted to ask you about, Alice, in terms of your own experiences in publishing and putting out your anthology this year. And what has been your experience in releasing an anthology like Disability Visibility during a global pandemic when in-person events have stopped, but virtual events have become so abundant. So in other words, I'd really love to hear your thoughts on the timing of how your book dovetails with the wider realities and discussion of accessibility.
I hate to say it, but I think, this book was released at an historic and almost, perfect time in the sense that a lot of the themes that are in the book, are really playing out in real life and playing out not just about the structural ableism that's, within our societies and the way that disabled people are constantly having to fight to be seen and heard. But also, I think, with this book, you know, I've seen a lot of other writers just, be really disappointed and scared and stressed out about having a book come out at this time. And I almost feel like I was made for this, which sounds kind of weird and spooky and, odd. But I think that most of my life, most of my involvement in activism and my engagement with people have been mostly through online platforms. And, this was always going to be part of my plan. And I can say that definitely in January, because this is my first book ever with a major publisher, I never had any experience with book tours or promotion. I just didn't really know what to expect, even though I had a feeling that, in-person events was definitely something that's, part of the expectation. So January pre-pandemic, I was like, I really thought I was going to be at a disadvantage. Just to let the audience know, like, I don't fly, travel, just even like, weekend little day trips, they can just wear me out. And it takes like a considerable, like one or two people that have to come with me. Just, it's a big production. So, I was really just thinking, oh my goodness, like this is going to be just really tough to get the word out. And, for events, I would have to say, I prepared in my mind, like, having to make the case for online events because there's no way I would be able to participate in, various libraries or bookstores outside of the San Francisco Bay Area where I'm located. And then the pandemic happened, and almost, every major cultural institution shifted, which is again a very bittersweet irony to the fact that disabled people have been just clamoring and advocating for access for a long time. And then suddenly, non-disabled people have something taken away from them. And suddenly we have online performances, live streaming, we have online museum exhibits, we have online conferences now, when people before were like told that it wasn't possible. Mm-hmm. So I feel like right now, I have been able to talk at the events in, Seattle. I have one coming up in DC tomorrow at the DC Public Library. None of this would have been possible, I think, without the pandemic. So there's this very weird ambivalence and just gratitude as well, but also just this other low-key anxiety that's, I don't want people to go back to normal. I've mentioned if, being on other events online, when I introduce myself, I say, thank you for having me, and I really hope that you consider continuing these kinds of events because you will be able to reach all kinds of writers and audiences in ways that you can't in person. And this is not to say that both things can exist at the same time. I think that having more choices is the whole thing, right? about opening things up rather than narrowing things. So, Kelly, I want to ask you a question now, if that's okay. You create mostly anthologies for young readers, and what do you like about anthologies? And is there anything in particular that you have in mind, especially for a young reader audience?
So my entire journey in starting to do nonfiction for young adults came because I worked as a teen librarian. That was my first career. And I became so frustrated that finding readable books in nonfiction for teens was so hard. It's gotten much, much better in the last half decade or so, but 10, 15 years ago when I started out, the bulk of nonfiction for teens were what I like to call report books. They're books that are great for research, for writing those papers that you have to for class, but they're not great for sitting down and browsing, or you have this topic that fascinates you and you just want to browse through a book and like pick and choose what you read about that topic. And so I found that I could do that. I realized there is this incredible opportunity, and knowing that I loved reading essay collections as an adult and I loved reading them as a young person, as a teenager, why couldn't some of what adults were seeing in terms of essay collections and anthologies be done for young readers? And to talk to them in a way that was authentic and real and honest, and didn't shy away from big, hard, heavy, sometimes unhappy topics in a way that didn't try to shield or protect them, but rather inform them and engage them. So that has always sort of been at the core of why I wanted to do these. And doing anthologies has been such an incredible opportunity as an editor to discover all these voices that either I've loved from afar and have never worked with a writer before, or there are folks that I never knew before but got to know through their writing or through their art. And that's opened up worlds for me in my own understanding and knowledge and engagement with a topic. And I think that then is such a treasure for new readers who come in, they get this book with 37 authors in it, and suddenly they find 10 new authors that they just love, have never heard of before, and those 10 authors each have 2 books. So now they have 20 more books to read. And then those books open more doors to them. And so I feel like anthologies are just these incredible portals to authors that it's such a gift to be able to give readers awesome content, but also awesome resources that go beyond the book.
Well, I think a lot about young people and, how mental health is so important. And mental health is a huge issue, I think, that young people face. And, one of your previous anthologies, Don't Call Me Crazy, I think is such an important book for young people. Do you want to mention a little bit about that anthology, especially, the fact that it is speaking to young people?
Yeah, I had a really difficult time editing that anthology, and part of that was because of the topic. I should say a lot of it was because of the topic, and having to edit writers talking about these really challenging mental health experiences was emotionally difficult for me. And also, just as an editor, it's really challenging to say to a writer, this is great, but can you talk about this a little bit more? Asking people to sort of dig deeper into their trauma doesn't feel good as an editor. Ultimately, it makes her a better, stronger piece of writing, but it's really difficult to ask people to dig in deeper on something that is so vulnerable, something that is so still stigmatized socially. But that particular book has really resonated with young readers because of that, because they are seeing their experiences, or they're seeing experiences that they're familiar with. Either friends have had those experiences, families had those experiences. And I've had the opportunity to talk with teenagers in classrooms, and it's just, they're hungry for this sort of opportunity to talk about what they're experiencing. And I feel like anthologies give such a great way to offer a wide perspective on a topic, because certainly I can talk about my experiences with a topic, but mine are so limited on my own identity. Whereas in a collection with 37 people, you get 37 different perspectives. And that shows just how huge any given topic is.
Mhm.
I want to ask you the same thing. I want to turn it back to you. What is it that you like about anthologies, and what makes them special for you?
Mhm. Well, I guess I have to be really honest. I confess that, reading a long form book, it's much harder now for me. I've always been a reader, but I do see I have to acknowledge that my own attention span has gotten shorter as I've gotten older over the years. And, I think that's one of the things that I love about anthologies, like you said, that they are shorter in nature. I mean, there's a whole book, but you don't have to read the entire book, and that there's such a variety. And I think there's, different lengths and different styles. I think that really keeps my interest level high. And I think that's what I really like about anthologies. And I think for me as an editor, putting together a collection, I mean, the joy is the whole assembling it together. And it's basically like curation, because the work that happens is really about who you select and kind of like, what stories and what kinds of, you want to make sure that you're capturing, a wide range, but in particular things that are important to you as an editor. So it's a great way to kind of express what I find important, but not having to say that through me as a writer. I just express this in the way that I share other people's work. I think that's, a real gift for me as, a gift and a power as an editor. And, I try to use that power wisely. And I really want to share things that, I feel are the most critical of our time. And that's, part of the reason why my book is called, first person stories from the 21st century, because these are works from 2000 forward. And it's really just an attempt to give people a kind of snapshot of the disability experience, from different vantage points. And, I was very intentional about who I wanted and the stories and the issues that people are talking about. So, like, you can see a lot of me in the way that in the book, in the stories, but also it's really not about me at all. I think that's kind of the fun part too.
I love that point a lot, because when I did my very first anthology, I spent a long time thinking about my role as editor. Do I purposely and intentionally select writers who are going to cover topics in a certain way and show this bias, or is my job as editor to say, your voice is important, write what you need to write, that's what matters? And I found going with that approach actually opened it way up for me as an editor to better then write my own contribution to see what wasn't there, as opposed to trying to craft something start to finish. Instead, I got the bulk as this piece of clay, and my job was then to go through and put in the fine details, which piece would work well before another piece, which would work well after another piece. And really, that work in creating the structure and the conversation among and between pieces is so cool. And I feel like that's where the real power is, not necessarily in like this book being this perfect ideal of what I have in my head. What I have in my head doesn't matter compared to what my contributors have given to me.
Yeah, and I feel like it's about letting the authors shine.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think you and I talked about this before, but I think for both of our contributors, we have a good sense of who they are as people, or have a good sense of their body of work. So it's like giving them the space to write whatever they want. It's very much a chance to to open things up. And I think that's what's really part of the risk taking, but also the excitement too, that they are open to write about things, and there's that trust that you have in them as a writer, and hopefully they have the trust in you as an editor. And I think that's a really important thing to build trust with one another, even though, we don't have to be best friends. We don't have to agree on everything, but I think having that mutual respect and trust is important. And I do try to fight for the contributors with the publisher too, in the sense that, sometimes there may be comments about this and that. I'm just like, let's preserve this person's voice as it is versus trying to, polish it or try to soften the edges. I think that's also my role too, to make sure that to defend the voice and the authenticity of the contributors. What are your thoughts on about establishing trust and a good working relationship with contributors?
I think you nailed it. I mean, I see my role as the person that they can come to, and I'm going to be the person who defends their writing and defends their style, defends their topic, to my editor and publisher if there's a challenge or there's an issue. I see myself as their advocate, where my editor is my advocate. So I'm working on behalf of these 37 voices, wanting them to stay true to what it is they're saying. And I've had, instances where I've had an editorial comment or a question, and instead of sending it to the writer and saying, fix it, it's a conversation I have with my writer. And I just say, hey, here's a thought my editor had, but this is 100%, balls in your court. You decide what you want. And my job as editor is to then tell my editor why you chose to do this or why you didn't choose to do this. And, most of the time they, make a tiny edit, make a tiny change, and that solves whatever the complication may have been. And it's really nice to be able to say to my editor, I have a great relationship with my editor as well, to say, my writer made this teeny tiny change and feels like that's enough, and I agree. And then most of the time, I think every single time, my editor's been like, yeah, perfect. But there's a lot to be said about what you mentioned in trusting your writer to write what they want to write. And I've been surprised by the pieces I've received, thinking like, I have this writer in Bodytalk who her body of work is very dark. It's very tragic. And she turned in this very, very funny piece that I didn't expect, and yet was perfect. And I think about experiences like that, where instead of telling my writer, like, I wanted you to contribute because I know you're going to be real and raw and you write this certain kind of story, I said, write what your truth is. And her truth in this instance was being really funny. And I don't think, had I insisted she was a certain type of writer, I would have gotten as strong a piece. So that long story is to say, I agree with you. You know, you are the advocate for your writer. And when you build that trusting relationship, they show up. And you as editor then are like, cool, this is incredible. I don't need to insert myself in your piece because you've brought your whole self to it.
Yeah, and I want to just bring up the fact that I am a contributor to your anthology, to Bodytalk, so I want to make sure that's transparent as well to everybody in the audience. And, you know, I do want to thank you for reaching out to me, I think early last year, about this project, because, you know, I did have an idea, but it was a germ of an idea, and I didn't really have a place for it yet. But hearing about the theme of the anthology, about bodies and anatomy, and about just, you know, I thought, okay, I think I do have a story that I haven't told before that fits in really well with your book. And I told you about it, and you're like, yeah, go for it. And, you know, it was just a really easygoing kind of editing process. And I think always getting positive feedback was great. I do think writers really need that. I think it's like, I remember one of the lines in your comments, you're like, oh, you made this sentence sing. They're like, yes, just sing. I was like, these are the kind of comments I live for as a writer.
I think about, as an editor, like, I think of my editing style a lot as having a conversation with that writer and really interacting with the piece. So I read these multiple times before I even start commenting, and then I always like to just put what my reaction is. You know, it could be a line that made me smile, and I'll say, this line made me smile. And I feel like doing that really sort of opens up to the writer what the reader's experience is. And I think that that gives such good insight into the places where they may need to add a little bit more, they may need to rethink something that they've said, because they see how readers reacted. And suddenly they're like, oh, this is where the reactions kind of stopped or fizzled or changed a little bit. Is that really what I was going for? Which I guess leads to the question, like, what is your editing process? I'm curious, because you've been edited by me, but I have not been edited by you, so I'm not familiar with how you do it.
Well, I have to say that number one, you know, I'm not very good at grammar, so I'm not a copy editor. So when I'm reading through a story, I'm not looking at structure, I'm not looking at all these kind of fine details. I'm really looking for the idea and how well this person is kind of sharing this idea. And I think, like you, I'm reading it from, like, you know, as somebody who's a reader who's deeply interested. So I think that is the key, that it's almost like you're a fan or an admirer, and you want the best for this person. So I'm reading it and I'm trying to think, okay, maybe there are some parts here that can flow better. Because I think flow is important to me. I think clarity is important too. So if some parts are a little bit like too wordy or just a little bit too much into one area, you know, I would say maybe you want to like condense this a little bit and just make sure you have, you know, room for all these other points you're making. So, you know, things like that. I think just to make sure that clarity, you know, that the ideas really come through and about the flow. So I think those are kind of the main things that are important to me. And I try to, in my comments, like not be directive, like change this, change that. I frame it in like how about this? Or what do you think about that? Because I really want the writer to want to do this. And, not without me having to say I want this changed, or I want to give them the opportunity to say, well, what about this instead? This, it is a back and forth, I think, as you said, Kelly. That's, editing should be a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And that maybe my suggestion additionally is not the best suggestion. Maybe they have a better edit, in mind. If I just said, I think this needs to be edited a bit, here's my take, but then they may have better ideas of how to rework a paragraph or a section. I think that to me is the exciting part, the process, the creative process, because we're merging our thoughts together and hopefully making a stronger piece. So, I really come at it, hopefully, I guess I don't have the perspective of a writer, but just hopefully from a place of being humble to say, here's what I think is really strong. Here are some areas that I think, I'd like for you to consider reworking. So I think, framing it that way versus, just massacring a piece and track changes. Nobody likes to see that, but, making sure that the writer doesn't feel attacked or too defensive.
Mm-hmm.
Because I guess, again, I've been on that side as well, where you are nervous when you submit a piece and you're waiting for the edits. You're just like, no, I hope they like it, I hope they like it. So I totally feel that. I deeply in my boots, and I try to be as responsive, in a timely manner. So, I don't want to leave them hanging, but I also want to be very communicative. Here are some things I think you could change, and what do you think? And then, we'll just go from there. But I think it's definitely a dialogue, and sometimes, it's not always, easy going dialogue. Just it can be a little difficult. So, have you ever had an experience that was, let's say, a bit kind of fraught in your mind?
I don't know if I've had any that have been fraught, but I've certainly had difficult conversations, and it was never about the writer. It's about the topic and making sure that the piece is as strong as it can be. I'm a lot like you in that I'm not directive at all. I really base my thoughts on editing in questions. So I always like to frame things I'm thinking about in terms of, is this what you meant? This is how I'm reading it. I could be misreading it. Perhaps your intent is for this. And sometimes I think by asking those questions, the writer is then given the opportunity to be the first to say, oh, that's actually what I meant. You just misread it. And that's valid. I've had a couple of experiences where, because of the personal nature of the topic, that writers have just struggled, and bless them for finishing the piece. Honestly, I know how challenging that is, and as an editor, I try to be as available as possible to read as much as possible, and also just to listen when they're like, this is hard. I had one writer in Don't Call Me Crazy who just wrote this incredible piece, but it was a very raw piece and something that ended up being both cathartic and traumatic in terms of writing it. And they asked me after they turned in the piece, after they had done the edits, they're like, I don't feel comfortable having my name attached to it. Can I use a pen name? And as an editor, I'm like, I know how much work you put into this. If that's what you want, that's what we're going to make happen. And, I didn't like that experience happened for this writer. I don't want any writer to ever feel that way. But I think at the end of the day, both of us are very happy with the piece and happy that we could publish it and protect their identity so they could have that opportunity to distance themselves. And, you know, who knows? They may down the road feel comfortable owning it, but maybe they won't, and that's okay.
Yep. And I guess I want to share one of my experiences because
Yeah.
it was very interesting for me. Is that so I did have a case, not for this book, but something else for the disability visibility project, where I did mark up very heavily to one person's essay, and I think it needed a lot more work. And I do let the document look. This is, just a mess, just a big mess of just so many track changes, and I was really just, I wrote some, passage like, prefacing like, this is, these are some of the things I have, issues with, and it looks like a lot, and some of the things I find problematic in terms of their language.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to say that because I did feel that way. I was like, oh, like, how do I say this without making the writer, without like, without insulting the writer? So basically, I mentioned like, some good stuff, but also just, I do think these are quite a bit of, editing and revision. And I also mentioned, I said in this message, don't feel like, if you don't feel comfortable, making these changes, that's okay. And we don't have to publish this because, I feel like I had to also stand my ground too, in terms of having certain things that I will not publish, even though this person had good reasons, like language wise, and I was like, it does not feel right to me, even though this person had a reason for it. So I gave him the option of like, this is, if you love your piece, pretty much I'm paraphrasing, but if you don't want to revise this, then I think we should agree that we're not going to publish this. That's one option, and the other option is, if you want to consider revising this, we'll keep working on it. And the author chose not to revise it because they really did not agree with my sense, with my opinion. And I think that's totally okay too. I think that's, I respect that person, and I also have to also be proud and respect what I publish and edit. So, there's a lot of that kind of tension, but also I think it's a good tension because you have to be able to stand by certain things. So that was actually a good lesson for me myself as an editor.
Well, exactly. It's like as much as you advocate on behalf of your writers, you also have to advocate on behalf of what you're putting out there. You want to be proud of this. You want to be able to defend everything in there, even if you don't agree with it. But you can't put something in there that you just can't stand by, that you can't defend, or that doesn't align with the values that you're hoping to sort of have the focus of your project, be it a book, be it a website, be it anything. Your name is attached to it. And I think all the time about just editor-author relationships are a real thing. There are editors that you're going to work really well with. There are editors you're not going to work well with. And I think that realization is what makes for good relationships. You understand you can have these conversations, and that you can have, I want to go back to how you framed it with that particular writer. Like, I love that you gave two good options. You said you can do this or you can do that, and that's what a good editor is. You're not saying, oh, I won't do it at all, or you have to completely change things, but you said, okay, here are two options. This is a working relationship. Whatever happens, happens. Like, this is work, and there's not personal feelings involved in it.
Yeah, and I really do hope that for the writers who are in the audience, they know that maybe you've had a bad experience with an editor, but that won't be the only experience. That there's so many editors out there, and I know that rejection and critiques and edits are hard. It's very painful sometimes. I mean, but I do think that there are editors out there who will get you. So, like, if you're a writer out there just trying to get your work out, just, don't give up, and just know that just as there's as many different kinds of writers, you're going to find all kinds of editors, and don't let one bad experience hold you back from submitting more work.
Yeah.
So, as we are going to wrap up, I'm going to have one last question to you before we go to Q&A, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things that I feel really strongly about is how we need more disabled people in publishing, and not just as authors, but really as editors and in every division of a publishing company. So, Kelly, based on your experiences as an editor and just your own kind of background and knowledge about how the publishing industry works, how do we get more publishers to hire disabled talent?
So I think one of the big things is that publishing can't be so centrally located in one of the most expensive cities in the world. And that in and of itself is already a huge limitation for so much talent that's out there. And I really think that as we're seeing more and more of the world go virtual and remote because of the pandemic, I hope that means that this centralization of publishing in New York City decentralizes. And as that happens, I think there will be far more opportunities for disabled writers. And I hope, beyond all hope, that means more of those with the power to hire in publishing realize they need to do that work too, and realize they have this opportunity to bring in this talent that's out there, and that will make their lists start to finish look far more representative of the world at large. And I want to toss this question back at you, because I love this question. And for me, the big thing is decentralizing where publishing is. I think that's a big start. I think we're seeing good conversation about the need for disabled voices, not just publishing books with their name on it, but all levels of publishing, from agent to editor to publisher, everything, publicists, like everything start to finish. But I want to hear from you. Like, what are your thoughts on it as well, particularly as somebody who is such an advocate for disabled writers and disabled people more broadly?
Well, I guess, part of it, I think, is definitely, I don't like the word pipeline, but I think we do need to build more pipelines and, publishers, just like every profession, right? Like, they need to be able to recruit and retain people from all marginalized communities. And, that's the problem with your profession is overwhelmingly white, middle class, and, not disabled. That's the environment, the working environment itself is not conducive or inclusive or, encouraging. So I think there's a lot of kind of slower, kind of systemic and cultural change that has to happen within an organization. So there's that part, which is probably a lot more complex and difficult, but also part of it is really looking at who they're bringing in at the very beginning entry level, and being very explicit about wanting people from all kinds of communities, and to also make sure that disability is part of any, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative. DEI, I think this is another just really basic thing. And, the other, a few months ago, I think HarperCollins, they put out a call for their internships this year. And the one thing I read on their tweets that all the internships are virtual this year. And I thought, my goodness, like, first of all, it's way overdue. But second of all, think about just how that opens it up to all kinds of people that would not have been able to travel or live in New York City, as you mentioned. And that made me angry as well, because for years, right, the disabled people that maybe wanted to join the publishing, but just could not find that avenue. I think that to me is also very frustrating that it took a pandemic to try to open these things up, not even all the way up, right? It's just opening up just a little bit. And I think, hopefully all of us will do as much as we can to keep forcing this issue and to really making sure that we speak to like all kinds of levels and up to the very top. And I think that's why in the introduction of my book, I mentioned, why isn't there a disability specific imprint? But one of the major 5 publishers, there's so many different kinds of imprints with very niche, focus. And, why can't there be one by now for really think about disabled writers, but also led by disabled editors? I think that's, like, to me, that's the dream. That's a way overdue dream, but that's, I just wrote that in my introduction. I was like, I just did a shoot my shot and just put it out there. And just really put that, like the publishers accountable, right? Like, wouldn't it be great if everybody demanded that, or demanded better representation? I should say, at least among the major publishers who do have more resources compared to smaller publishers. This is something that could be done. It's not going to solve everything, but it is a step in the right direction. So I'll leave it at that. And we are now have 8 minutes, so I guess I'll have Emily back on.
Hello, hello. Thank you all. There are a lot of really great questions that have come in. Let's see which ones we can get to. To what extent do you view your respective anthologies as vehicles for social change? Kelly, do you want to take a stab at that first?
I love this question, and my answer is pretty straightforward in that I think in reaching a teen audience, these anthologies really allow young people to find the language for the things that they're thinking about, the things that they care about, and the things that they're passionate about. And that helps them to become leaders in social change. They have these conversations that don't belittle them, don't speak down to them, but say, look, like, this is what you're living. This is your reality. Here are tools to go be the best you can be.
Yeah, and I would say that with disability, visibility, I do think every story is very political, whether it's, explicitly political or not. I think it is very radical and political to say people telling their stories and living their lives and be very unapologetic about it. And I think, I do hope that this book, that readers come away with just being a little bit more politicized, get a little bit more aware of how ableism works and what ableism looks like. And that to me, I think, is hopefully the start of their journey toward social change.
Wonderful. What was the process for finding a publisher? Were your contributors invited, or was there a call for essays, or both?
Julie, do you want to go first?
Sure. I reach out to my writers. So I always, when I create a outline for my project, I have a list of folks that I really would like to work with. And that's the list I start with. And I see who is interested. And then once I kind of get a feel on who from that list is going to take part, I look and see what I have and what I'm lacking. And that's when I start to do my research and finding new voices to include. And that research is just, looking around at the books that are out there, looking around at the cool projects that are out there, and using my contributors who have these incredible networks themselves and know these fantastic people. And I'll tap them and say, for Bodytalk, I shouldn't say I could not find, but I had a deaf contributor who ended up leaving the project, and I needed a new deaf contributor because that was crucial. And I asked my contributors and got so many incredible folks that I got to know their work and find somebody who could share a story that was really essential for the collection.
Yeah, I think unlike Kelly's book, where they're all original pieces, the majority of pieces in disability, visibility are already published. So I had this motion proposal, like this, massive list of, articles and essays and all kinds of pieces that I basically bookmarked and collected over the years. And, I think it was a matter of just, talking with the editor and just getting a feel for the outline and just, cutting this list and holding it down. And, then it was a process of reaching out to them. I do have, I think, 4 or 5 original essays. So I reached out to those writers. And I really wanted, something new as well to offer. So, there was an open call for submissions. And I think I'm very glad there was an open call, because that's also a lot of work and responsibility to go through every submission and just, read them and really give them the time and the care that they deserve. So, yeah, I definitely did not go through that route. So I think it's almost a little bit more efficient to have the pieces you kind of already kind of have in mind.
I think we have time for one more, but we'll have to make this one a quick one. From a writer's perspective, where do you see anthologies in the future? Good.
Well, I want to see anthologies like in different kind of formats and mediums. I think I like that metaphor. Like, I like the term of a mixtape or a playlist, a Spotify playlist. So, I want to think about mixing things up. Like, anthology doesn't have to be just about the written word. Maybe anthologies in the future are going to be visual, audio, text-based, just tactile. Who knows? Like, just, I want to really think about different ways people can communicate and express themselves. I think finding a way to package all of that would be the challenge, but maybe the anthology of the future is just this big tape that's, or maybe a scrapbook or some kind. I do just pulls things together.
I love that vision so much as somebody who's done scrapbook style anthologies, that writing essays, lists, but I love the whole idea of something that would also have an audio component, that would have this digital component, and make it just so inclusive of every kind of creative medium possible. In terms of like where I see them in the future, I think that they're going to continue to do what they've always done. They come and go in waves. And I think right now we are seeing so many incredible diverse anthologies covering topics that haven't been covered before. fiction and nonfiction, and I would love to continue to see it going. Seeing these new voices emerge and have the opportunity to tell these powerful stories in a short form.
Well, I just want to thank Kelly for being in conversation with me. I think it's just this year, even though there's such horrible things, I do feel like finding joy and comfort right now is more important than ever. So I just want to thank you for what you've contributed to the world, and that, all of us are just, doing the best we can. So it's just really lovely to be a community. It's really lovely to be in community with you.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I love that we got to have this conversation. I mentioned during my panels for this book, one of the things that I've loved about the virtual format is getting to have more in-depth, face-to-face conversations with writers that I've pretty much only communicated with via email, and it's such a different experience to talk, and it's so enriching. So thank you so much.
All right, good night, everyone. Thank you to the interpreter as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Good night. Good night.
White text on a black background reads, "Thank you for watching." Please visit us on Facebook at SFSU Disability, on Twitter at Longmore Inst, or online at longmoreinstitute.sfsu.edu.